Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the most valuable thing you own, the thing your parents saved, the thing your grandparents passed down, has just been declared illegal. Not stolen, not taxed, not devalued. Simply forbidden. And not by thieves or crooks, but by your own government. That's what happened in the United States in 1933, when the most powerful nation on Earth made it a federal crime for its citizens to own gold. Not to sell it, not to trade it, to own it. The punishment? A $10,000 fine, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today, and up to 10 years in prison. This single act transformed the American financial system forever. And to understand why, we have to step back into one of the darkest economic chapters in U.S. history, the Great Depression. By the early 1930s, America was not the land of opportunity. It was a land of despair. Factories had fallen silent, families lost homes, jobs, and savings. 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. Across the country, people lined up for bread. Banks were closing every day, and those that remained open were barely hanging on. You see, back then the U.S. dollar wasn't just paper. It was a promise. Every paper note could, in theory, be exchanged for a specific amount of gold, $20.67 per ounce. That was the foundation of the classical gold standard, the idea that money must be backed by something real, tangible, and scarce. But when confidence cracked, the system began to eat itself. People started rushing to their banks, demanding gold in exchange for their paper. And that panic, that unstoppable human instinct to protect what's yours, was draining the nation's gold reserves at a terrifying pace. The banking system was collapsing under its own promises.
In March 1933, a man with a confident voice and a calm smile took the oath of office, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He inherited a nation in chaos. The financial system was on life support. The economy was in free fall. Banks had closed their doors. Money wasn't circulating. Trust, the invisible glue that holds an economy together, was gone. Roosevelt needed a solution bold enough to stop the panic and radical enough to reset the system itself. Less than a month later, he made his move. On April 5, 1933, a quiet piece of paper changed everything. It was called Executive Order 6102. In one stroke, it declared that private ownership of gold coins, bullion, or gold certificates was illegal. Every American was ordered to turn in their gold by the end of April, to a bank or directly to the Federal Reserve, in exchange for paper dollars, fixed at $20.67 per ounce. It was presented as a patriotic duty, a temporary emergency measure to stabilize the economy. The government insisted this was necessary to stop hoarding and restore confidence. But behind the rhetoric, it was something far more profound. A massive, forced transfer of wealth from citizens to the state. Across the country, people lined up to surrender their gold. Family heirlooms, savings, wedding coins, all turned over to the government. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Those who refused faced fines and prison. A few resisted. Some hid gold in basements, others buried it on their farms or melted it into jewelry to disguise it. But most complied. The risk was simply too great. And just like that, centuries of personal gold ownership, the oldest form of private wealth, ended overnight.
Then came the twist no one saw coming. Less than a year later, in January 1934, the government passed the Gold Reserve Act. It revalued gold from $20.67 an ounce to $35. With a single policy change, the U.S. dollar lost roughly 40% of its value. The gold that citizens had been forced to surrender, under threat of prison, was now worth nearly twice as much. In other words, Americans handed over their wealth, and the government immediately increased the value of what it had taken. That difference, the instant profit, became one of the largest wealth transfers in modern history. Roosevelt's administration had achieved something remarkable. They had rewritten the rules of money itself. This wasn't just an act of confiscation, it was a reset. By seizing gold and devaluing the dollar, Roosevelt freed the government from the constraints of the gold standard.
No longer would every dollar need to be backed by a fixed amount of gold. Now, the government, through the Federal Reserve, could expand the money supply, spend, borrow, and stimulate at will. It gave Roosevelt the firepower to launch the New Deal, fund massive public projects, and inject life into the broken economy. For the banks, it was salvation. The gold, now centralized in the Federal Reserve, rebuilt confidence and allowed credit to flow again. For the government, it was power, absolute control over the nation's monetary system. But for ordinary Americans, it was betrayal wrapped in patriotism. The very thing that had always been considered the ultimate store of value, gold, was taken from them, only to enrich the very institutions that had failed them.
The outrage didn't end quietly. Soon, the fight reached the Supreme Court in a series of cases known as the Gold Clause cases. At the time, many private contracts, especially long-term loans and bonds, were written in gold clauses, meaning debts had to be repaid in gold, not in devalued paper. When the government seized gold and changed its price, those contracts were effectively voided. Creditors sued, arguing that the government had broken its own word, violated private property rights, and rewritten legal agreements by force. In 1935, by the slimmest of margins, just one vote, the Supreme Court sided with Roosevelt. That ruling set a dangerous precedent. In times of crisis, the government could override private contracts, rewrite financial rules, and seize wealth, all in the name of national interest. The decision marked a turning point. America had moved from a system where money was anchored in gold to one where money was anchored in authority. Who benefited from this transformation? First, the government itself. By revaluing gold, Washington instantly increased the value of its reserves by billions of dollars. That gave Roosevelt the power to fund his New Deal without raising taxes in the middle of a depression. Then came the banks. With gold now consolidated under the Federal Reserve, confidence in the financial system returned. The same institutions that had once been collapsing were suddenly back on their feet, saved by the very assets once owned by the public. And finally, the wealthy and well-connected. Those who knew the order was coming or had the means to move gold overseas escaped unscathed. Some quietly shifted wealth into forms exempt from confiscation, rare coins, art, or foreign accounts. Ordinary Americans, meanwhile, followed the law and paid the price.
The real losers were the people who trusted the system. Millions who had saved gold as a safeguard against hard times watched it vanish into government vaults. They received paper dollars in return, dollars that lost value the moment gold was revalued. They had done nothing wrong. They hadn't speculated or gambled. They simply believed in sound money and paid for that belief. And what they learned, painfully, was this. The rules of money aren't fixed. They can be changed overnight by decree. Now here's the question. Why does this matter today? Because the lesson of 1933 didn't end with gold. It became a template for how governments respond when the financial system is in danger. When the system trembles, they act, not to protect citizens, but to protect the system itself. In 1933, it was gold confiscation. In 2008, it was trillion-dollar bank bailouts funded by taxpayers. In 2013, Cyprus seized a portion of citizens' bank deposits to rescue its banks, a bail-in. And in 2020, unprecedented money printing during the pandemic inflated asset prices, eroding purchasing power and widening the gap between the wealthy and everyone else. Different methods, same principle. Wealth flows upward, away from savers and workers, toward the system that created the crisis in the first place. Inflation itself is a quiet confiscation. No one knocks on your door. No one takes your gold. But year after year, your savings buy less. Your labor is worth less. And the difference, the invisible margin, is absorbed by the system. It's confiscation by policy, not by force. A slow erosion rather than a sudden order. So ask yourself, if the government once made gold illegal, what stops it from taking more drastic measures today? Digital money makes control easier than ever. Accounts can be frozen with a keystroke. Taxes can be adjusted automatically. Wealth can be tracked and seized instantly. The precedent is already there. 1933 proved that when the system is threatened, rules are flexible. Your rights, your contracts, your savings, they're only safe until they're inconvenient.
True wealth isn't just what you own. It's what can't be taken from you. Knowledge, skills, awareness, assets that stand outside of paper promises and political decrees. Gold once played that role until the law changed. Today, it might be something else: decentralized technology, tangible goods, or simply the ability to understand how systems work before they change. Because history doesn't repeat word for word, but it rhymes. And every time a crisis hits, the rhyme grows louder. When Roosevelt seized gold, it wasn't sold to the public as theft, it was sold as patriotism, a sacrifice for the greater good, a temporary measure to save the system. And maybe it did save the system, but it also taught a timeless truth, that in moments of crisis, power consolidates. And the cost of that power is almost always paid by the people least able to resist. The Great Depression ended, the economy recovered, but the world that emerged afterward was different. Money was no longer a promise of gold, it was a promise of government trust. And from that moment forward, the foundation of the global financial system would rest not on precious metal, but on faith. Faith that the authorities will do the right thing, faith that the rules will stay the same, faith that what's legal today won't be forbidden tomorrow. But history has a habit of testing that faith.
So the next time you hear a politician promise stability or a banker assure you that your money is safe, remember what happened in 1933. Remember how, in the name of rescue, the government rewrote the rules of money and took what generations had built. Because history's lesson is not buried in dusty textbooks, it's alive, it's waiting to repeat itself. If they could make gold illegal once, what makes you think your digital dollars, your savings, your assets are untouchable now? The truth is, when the system is threatened, the rules will always change, and those who don't understand how it changes end up paying the price. Real wealth isn't numbers on a screen, it's awareness, it's knowledge, it's the ability to see through the illusion before it collapses. History doesn't just tell you what happened, it warns you what's coming. So if this story made you look at money, power, and trust a little differently, don't stop here. Because the next chapter of history isn't written yet, and you'll want to understand it before it's too late. Subscribe and never see history or money the same way again.